I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Mr. Griffin, would you like to lead us in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sunshine Statement. All requirements of the Open Public Business Meetings Law have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting are posted in the Borough Hall, Oradell Public Library, Oradell Public School Main Office, and filed with the Record and Town News, and all persons requesting such notice. Ms. Noreen, would you like to read the mission statement?
Certainly. The Oradell Public School is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through comprehensive, innovative curriculum and instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, and responsible citizens.
Thank you. At this point in the meeting, we will allow public comment on the reorganization session items numbers 7 through 14 only. Please remember to state your name, address each time you address the board, as well as sign in with this information. Will the first person wishing to be heard please step forward? Okay, seeing none. So tonight for the board secretary report, I'm going to be reporting on the November election results. So on Tuesday, November 8th, 2022, the annual school board election for the Oradell Public School was held. Voting was conducted for 3 seats to the Board of Education, each for a 3-year term. The results of the election were as follows. Mrs. Jamie Downey, 1,514 votes. Mr. John Walsh, 1,459 votes. Mrs. Dorothy Watson-Nichols, 1,344 votes. Mrs. Nancy Shapiro, 1,305 votes. The candidates elected were Mrs. Jamie Downey, Mr. John Walsh, and Mrs. Dorothy Watson-Nichols. A copy of these results will be entered into the official minutes of this meeting. The elected candidates may now step to the microphone and they will be administered the oath of office.
You could all go.
Okay, please raise your right hand.
It's going to be all of you at the same time, so. John.
Just the microphone.
Rita, you got my shirt?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
What are we doing?
I state your name.
I, John A. Walsh,
Do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New Jersey,
and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same
and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
and to the governments established in the United States and this state,
and the governments established in the United States and this state,
under the authority of the people,
on the authority of the people,
so help me God.
so help me God.
I state your name.
I, John A. Walsh,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear or affirm
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of a Board of Education,
that I possess the qualifications prescribed by law for the office of member of the Board of Education,
and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to RS 19:4-1,
and that I am not disqualified as a voter pursuant to RS 19:4-1,
nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJS 18A:12-1,
nor disqualified due to conviction of a crime or offense listed in NJS 18A:12-1,
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability.
and that I will faithfully, impartially, and justly perform all the duties of that office according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
At this point, I'll do the roll call. Mrs. Acosta? Here. Mrs. Negum?
Here.
Mrs. Downey? Here. Mr. Griffin?
Here?
Mrs. Norian?
Here.
Mrs. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Walsh?
Here.
Mr. Darian?
Here.
Mrs. Nichols?
Here.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to open up the nomination for the President of the Board of Education. Yes.
I'll second that.
Any other nominations?
If she wants the job,
Okay, seeing none, roll call. Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Abstain.
Okay, congratulations, Mrs. Nichols. Here is your... Oh.
We'll open the floor for nomination of vice president. Do we have a motion? I would like to nominate Greg Darian.
Second.
Do I have another motion? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Yeah.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
I'll abstain.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Abstain.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Let's move to the code of ethics. We'll do what we do every year. We'll just, we'll start with Mr. Griffin, and we'll then go to Mrs. Norian, and we'll each take a paragraph. So, Mr. Griffin, do you want to start with "I will uphold," and we'll go around and read it, and then we'll vote on the code of ethics?
I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education and court orders pertaining to schools. Desired changes shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures.
I will make decisions in terms of the educational welfare of children and will seek to develop and maintain public schools that meet the individual needs of all children, regardless of their ability, race, creed, sex, or social standing.
I will confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal, and I will help to frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them.
I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see that they are well run.
I will recognize that authority rests with the Board of Education and will make no personal promises nor take any private action that may compromise the board.
I will refuse to surrender my independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups, or to use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends.
I will hold confidential all matters pertaining to the schools which, if disclosed, would needlessly injure individuals or the schools. In all other matters, I will provide accurate information and, in concert with my fellow board members, interpret to the staff the aspirations of the community for its school.
I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after consideration of the recommendation of the chief school administrator.
I will support and protect school personnel in proper performance of their duties. The next.
Yeah, take the last.
Okay. I will refer all complaints to the chief school administrative office and will act on the complaints at public meetings only after failure of an administrative solution.
So we have in our folders the acknowledgement of receipt of the Code of Ethics. So everyone has to just sign it and give it to Mr. Marmara tonight. So I guess you want to make a motion for the Code of Ethics, Mr. Darian?
I make a motion that we adopt item number 6, Code of Ethics.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Abstain?
Mr. Griffin?
Can I stop 1 second? You may not want to abstain for the Code of
Okay,
Ethics.
yeah.
Okay, please. Mrs. Norian? Mrs. Walker?
Yeah.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. So the rest of our reorg agenda is number 7 through 14. Does anyone want to make a motion for consent agenda?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Walker. Any question on numbers 7 through 14? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Yeah.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yeah.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, we'll move into the public session. We'll just do another roll call quick.
Ms. Acosta?
Here.
Ms. Negum?
Here.
Mrs. Downing?
Here.
Mr. Griffin?
Here.
Ms. Norian?
Here.
Mrs. Walker?
Here.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yeah.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, here. Open to the public for agenda items only. You may want to complain them in your parking spot. I didn't think you were coming.
That's okay. I forgot my ID tag, so I dropped my credit card, but I didn't get it.
So it worked out. We'll go, I guess, right to the superintendent's report.
Before I do the NJSLA comparison, I feel like I've been talking about test scores a lot, and I have a slight issue with that because I hope that Oradell Public School is about more than test scores. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the things that just kind of come by and they go and we forget about them in December, and that is to publicly recognize our music department. In December, we had a choral concert, we had an instrumental concert, we had 3 winter sing-alongs. We sang with 796 children in one day. Thousands of people were in this building. And then the next day, when they were tired and exhausted, they not only taught classes, but Mr. Butcher also brought his instrumentalists wandering through the building to carol for different classrooms and for the administrative offices downstairs. That day, I made a point of going to see Ms. Riesebeater because I wanted to make sure her students knew that not every school has a winter song fest, especially schools of this size. The fact that they had the perfect opportunity to say, new music teacher, no more, and they said, no, we're going to do this. And they brought some new traditions. If you saw the last song at the Winter Song Fest, every child had a finger light on. I'm not going to tell you those finger lights were all over the place, so don't touch any of them. But it really is one of my favorite days at Oradell Public School because it truly is a day not just about our children, but about our community. And the other thing that happened the day after the winter sing-along, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go on our Facebook page or our Instagram page, or you can link to it right on the front page of the website, is Mrs. Hawley was feathered. We tried something new this year to build excitement about the turkey trot, and anybody who knows me knows the turkey trot is near and dear to my heart. It is something I dreamed about bringing to Oradell Public School to teach our children that they can give back, even at a young age. And so not only do we have the Turkey Cup this year to the class that brings in the most food items for the Center for Food Action, but the grade level that brought in the most items got to feather Mrs. Hawley, which meant she put on a blow-up turkey suit, and we covered her in syrup. Now, Mrs. Hawley, always being fiscally responsible, decided to buy her butter syrup at the dollar store. I encourage you never to do that. It is the worst smelling thing I have ever heard and smelled. So, and then it was the kindergartners, that 100 kindergartners in pajamas the day before winter break. You've never seen something so exciting, but it was something new, and it's something that we will continue to do for our children. The administrative team has a little joke that came from the fact that the administrative team, after the year of slime and pie in the face, put a kibosh on dairy. They refused to have any dairy products put on them. Well, after butter syrup, dairy might be coming back next year. And then I had the opportunity this week to walk through art classes, and we have our teachers reviewing the code of conduct with all our students as a good way to remind everybody about the expectations in the district. And many of our classrooms are setting goals right now. And I love listening to kids set goals because, yes, you have the child that has heard, I need to read more, and so that's their goal. And you have children who say, I'm going to help mom more. And you definitely have one who told me he's going to hit more home runs. I saw him today. I said, what'd you do yesterday to work towards that goal? And then I ran into this third grade girl who told me she was going to spread kindness and love in the world. Yeah. That, more than our test scores, as proud of them as I am, is what I hope this district will be known for. So on to the test scores. I think it's the...
Ms. Bozios, before you go down to test scores, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
If I can. So I was in the building before the sing-along ceremonies. I was looking at the auditorium during the day, and I was hanging out in the balcony, and because there were kids practicing, and it was, obviously crazy and chaotic and very loud, and it was just in between, I guess, classes. So, a bunch of kids were leaving, other kids were coming, and what struck me as being really odd, because I've never experienced it, but I guess, each generation kids are different. So when they were leaving their practice sing-along, they kept singing, and they were singing in the hallway, and they were singing. I was just taken aback. It was really surprising. So it just struck it was interesting, and how that, they just didn't sing and then got up and left, and that was it. I mean, they were shouting in the halls as they were leaving and singing. It was just crazy. I thought it really moved me.
Okay, so when we presented the test scores earlier this year, the one thing you kept asking me, but how did we do compared to our peers? And so literally the week before break, pretty much, the state finally released this data. And by releasing it, that means they put spreadsheets on the back end of the state website with more rows and columns than I've ever come across, because it's every subgroup, every district, every school across the state of New Jersey. And so what we've always done when we've done this is we've looked at our Bergen County I district comparison group, and those are the 21 districts that are listed here. Now, it's really important to know that the state has not redistricted since 2000. So these are the 21 districts that were considered I districts in 2000. The state's really been working on a new way to group districts together, and they tried that a couple years ago. They looked at free and reduced lunch rates. They looked at ESL populations. They still haven't come up with anything. So I'm still going to refer to this as our comparison district group, because when we look at them, we go, oh, yeah, these are the districts that are like us. However, it is important to know that this grouping is from 2000. And since I've been doing this district testing presentation, I've always stressed that it's important that we don't compare apples to oranges. So I don't like to compare last year's third grade to this year's third grade, because that's a whole different group of kids. So we've always stressed looking at a cohort of students. Now, the problem with doing that is we haven't had testing in 2 years. So the only group that we have longitudinal data on is last year's 6th grade. So when they were in 3rd grade, in language arts, they were 12th out of the 21 districts, and in math, they were 19th out of the 21 districts. Last year, as 6th graders, they were 5th out of the 21 districts and 8th out of the 21 districts. And the reason we use that as our comparison is because it's the exact same kids. We're comparing them against the exact same kids they were compared to as 3rd graders. And I've always said that, when we see growth, then we know that that's not just growth from our 6th grade teachers, that's growth all the way up. And to say that we made that type of growth during COVID is important. So since we couldn't do that, I did what I don't love to do, which is just to isolate each grade level. And this data is done on the percent passing. So to score passing, you need a 4 or a 5 on the NJSLA, which is a score of 750 typically. And I'm not going to read you the data, but you can see it there. Mathematics is the first column, language arts is the second column, and science is the third column. Overall, we are consistently in the top half of the Bergen County I. And when I went back, because I love data, so I historically went and looked back, what I think is significant about this data is it's incredibly consistent. We're not seeing one grade at number 3 and another grade at number 19. And it's consistent across subject areas, which has been something we as a district have been very concerned about, is our mathematics progress equal to our language arts progress. And I did pull out the students with disabilities, and it's important to know that it's very difficult to do this comparison, because when the state gives us the subgroups, they give us students with disabilities, and they give us students with special ed modifications. A student with a special ed modification includes a 504 student. So that student may get nothing special during the school year except for maybe extended time on a test. It's not indicative of any kind of extra teaching or anything in our special ed department. So I don't love to use that. I don't really love to use students with disabilities either, because it's the speech-only students. But when I looked at it, you have so fewer students getting speech-only services in grades 3, 4, 5, 6. I felt like it impacted the data less. So again, you'll see that our special ed students compared to their cohorts did quite well. And the reason that the total number of districts differs is because you need 10 students to be able to share that data. And if you think about some of the districts, take an Alpine, they're not going to have enough students because they're this big. Okay, and so that's typically why sometimes there's 13 districts and sometimes there's 17 districts. And in 5th grade, I think in one case you needed to have 19, and I think a kid didn't take a test because they had it in 2 subjects but not in the 3rd, which, and I even know which district it was, and I was like, this makes no sense, but my guess is one student didn't take a test. And then the newspaper did something really interesting this year. They normally, when they submit the big table that they put on nj.com and everybody goes on the patch and comments on and everything, they normally use the percent passing as the comparison, and they didn't this year. They used the scale score. So the scale score is the score a student got on the test. It ranges from a 650 to an 850, 750 being passing. Typically 800 is exceeding the standard. That changed on some tests this year. Sometimes it was a little higher than 800. I think if I was to make a theory, it's because you heard so much rhetoric about students not passing, that they wanted to draw attention from that and use the scale score instead. I like the scale score because you get credit for students who having a district where we have a lot of students exceeding the expectation. And so our scale scores are higher, and I like to see that. So I also did the comparison to the Bergen County I, so those 21 districts with scale scores. But since I had that data from across the state, and I can't sleep a lot of times, I did the state data also. Because, listen, it'd be great to be number 1. Everybody loves to be number 1, right? That's why some high school districts don't have valedictorians anymore, because the only person that's happy when they send out those numbers is number 1. But when I look at sixth grade language arts, and maybe because language arts is, my love, there are 8 districts out of 551 that scored higher than us. Well, that's pretty darn good. And that says that our students and the work we have put into language arts is reaping rewards. And I always go to sixth grade because I believe it's a credit to the entire district. Those are the kids we're sending out, to the world, or Riverdale. So as I've said before, I believe that these are solid test scores this year. I will be sharing this with the staff at our Martin Luther King Professional Day. I think the scale scores show that we're not just passing, we're exceeding that 750 passing mark. As I've said all year long, we continue to use this data. We use data all the time to decide what needs to be taught better. But more than anything else, and I always say this, the staff knows that test scores are really important to me, but it's also important that we celebrate them. And I believe as a district, we have a lot to celebrate. And our focus right now is we're not an urban district. We don't need to make these huge leaps. We just need to be a little bit better every day. And that's kind of the phrase I use with staff. That's the phrase I use with students. That's the phrase I use with our administrative team. So do you have any questions about the data?
The achievement with the students with disabilities, at the bottom, some of the schools have little stars. Does that just mean that they don't have any students with disabilities, or they just didn't take the test?
They don't have enough to report. So if it's a line, they had none. And if it's a star, it means they don't have the 19 or the students that they need. Correct.
Of children, understood.
What can we do as a district to get the state to give us the results a lot earlier?
I have a feeling they're working on it. We just got the testing schedule for this year, and it's incredibly tight. We have to be done with standardized testing, which I don't like, by the end of May. Now, my guess is that's pressure that they're facing to turn things over. It's not great for us as a district because we have to get testing done and the musical and the concert all in.
Hasn't it always been in May?
But we usually have until June. And this year, we don't have that. The fact is, you like to test later because when we finish testing, sometimes people think school is done, and it's not done. So we usually have till like June 6th to finish testing, and this year we have to finish by, I think it's the week before, it's May something, but then it's Memorial Day, and if we end up having any kind of snow day issues, then it's a tight schedule.
We should find a way because it's part of your evaluation.
Well, but I have the data that matters. I have every student's data in June, and that's the data that should matter to us because that's the data that tells us.
Yeah, but we don't have it.
Well, you can have that data. I just can't give you the summative data. I know what students passed in June. I just have nothing to compare it to.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm looking at the comparison districts, and I think just based on my personal experience, these are all relatively similar communities. But when I'm looking at your numbers, and I'm on page 4, all students, the second half of page 4. We came in 8th place, 9th place, 8th place, somewhere else. Here we go, 8th, 9th, and 8th. And I would like to see how we did to other districts for those metrics. So it's a lot of data. If you could just dump. No, I don't know what the districts are.
It's in your packet. 56-page document.
Is it this one? Oh, so where does this correspond to? Oh, okay.
This has a correlating spreadsheet that will show you the 21 districts. There's a chart for the passing rate for every grade level, and there's a chart for the scale score for every grade level, and there's a chart for the students with disabilities for every grade level.
Okay, I don't think this was in my packet.
Yes, it was.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So when I looked at these numbers, it's hard to say, I'm in 5th place out of 21. What is that, right? So 50% is 10.5 or 11, right? If you're in 11th place,
Percentile rank?
yeah, you're 50, you're doing better, and 50, you're doing worse. So, these numbers are good. I mean, we're in the 60th, 66, 76, which is good. Most three-quarters of everyone is doing worse than we are. So I just wanted to look at those areas that the 8th place, 9th place, and I think the data's here. So I'll look at it later. Thank you.
And I think it's really important when you look at that data to actually look, the scores are there and the number of students are there.
Okay.
Because that is going to impact the data, and sometimes the difference, it's 1 percentage point. 1 percentage point is 1 student, if even that. I mean, frankly, in 5th grade, when we have 100 students, it's 1 kid.
I just have one clarification on these sheets here. I don't understand the L1, L2, L3%.
Sure. So level 1 is students who are not meeting the expectation. L2 is students that are partially meeting the expectations. L3 is the one that I wish the state would get rid of. It's approaching the expectations. So it's like if they took it on another day, they might have passed. L4 is meeting the expectation, and L5 is exceeding the expectation.
Okay, so these are aligned with those levels, basically. Okay, I didn't quite.
So
get that.
the last column there is level 4 and level 5 added together.
Got it.
So your
okay.
total passing rate is those two together.
I didn't look at this either in my packet, but do we have anything? I guess it's here. I guess I could sort it myself.
What do you want?
I'm curious how we came on the top level.
Oh, I have the
I
Excel
just looked
document,
at
so
it.
I could easily score the
Would you
L5s.
look at that at all?
Yeah.
How do you
Yeah.
have it?
We're actually typically much higher, which is why our scale score is, as I've said, it's why our scale score sometimes is higher than our percent passing, because our level 5 performance is typically much higher than other districts.
Mrs. Walker?
I'm very pleased. I think we've really, really shown such improvement over the 9 years that I've been on the board, and consistently so. But what I find interesting and a good thing is that we're basically high up, but not number 1 all the way through, so that we're getting there. And when you look at the number of students in the school, that too has a lot to do with it. I know, so you take River Edge and it has 2 schools, Cherry Hill and Roosevelt, so they combine those 2 when they report them. But still, to meet the needs of, say, 800 students in a school,
And
it's a good, my compliments to administration and to the teachers, certainly.
I'm not sure if I gave you school scores. If you're interested, I have them as well. I find that to do the school comparison, you actually have to do a percentile rank, as Mr. Darian was speaking about before, because there are 38 schools that have a 3rd grade, but there are 23 schools that have a 6th grade. So it's a little bit harder to look at the data that way, which is why I chose to stick with district data this year.
Having taught in Alpine, very small, and there might only be 12 students in 6th grade or 8th grade, so that it becomes very challenging, but they do most of the time meet the need to make sure that that 1 student does not go down, because that can throw their whole score really well.
I think another important thing to point out is we keep hearing all about how everyone has lost so much during COVID. And it really kind of makes you proud of our staff and what they've done to make sure that our children are still succeeding at a standard. They're really succeeding. Makes us extremely proud of what they've done. And of course, the students for the hard work they put in.
That concludes my report.
Mr. Marmara?
So with a new year, just wanted to send a quick reminder that each of you as a board member are due to go through the mandated training, board training. Some of you have already signed up. It's a good time now to knock out some of those credits. I think the next class is available January 12th. As a reminder, if you would like to participate, you just have to register through me. And if you have any questions about the mandated training, you could just also let me know. And then just finally, I'm sure it's going to be touched upon later in the meeting, but it's School Board Recognition Month. So quick thank you to all the members of the school board here and everyone else that's serving their towns with the school boards. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Marmara, do you think you could email the board members who are due for training? Because not everybody. So can you email everyone to let them know what they need to take this year so they're aware of it?
The specific
'Cause
class?
not everybody is
yep,
due,
because
and
it's
then-
different classes for each board member.
Right, and not every board member has to take.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll move to minutes. We have a review of December 14th. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Marmara. We'll move on to the approval of November 16th minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing? Mr. Griffin?
Abstain.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Committee reports, Mr. Darian, would you take administrative items?
Yes. Give me 1 second. Lost my place. I would like to introduce items A1 through A3.
Second.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing? Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Curriculum, Mrs. Norian?
To present motion C1, approval of field trip.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? You know, as we're heading back to New York City for the first time in a long time, probably since a long time. So that's a good thing. Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Mr. Darian, would you take finance technology?
Yes. I'd like to introduce items D1 through D9.
Second.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I don't know if I should talk about this here in finance or under old business, but our last agenda under finance, we tabled an item for discussion until tonight. So I just wanted to bring it up so that we talk about it because we said we would. So I think I'd like to discuss it. It's not on the agenda tonight, but this was for payment to GL Group that was doing work on the auditorium. So Mr. Marmor, can you kind of quickly give us an update? What's your recommendation? Are we going to add this to next agenda, or is this going to be?
So currently, it's not on tonight's bill list. It's still being held. We've been reaching out to GL to get an updated work schedule. They did work over the break. They completed work in the lobby, but we're still trying to find out an updated work schedule so that we can kind of coordinate our own school events with their work. And it's been an ongoing situation trying to get in touch with them.
Okay, so we should just probably table this indefinitely now until you
Unless-
give us further
Yeah.
notice. Okay.
Mhm.
Any
Mr.
other
Walsh?
questions?
Are they asking for the money?
Nope, they haven't once.
It's on anyway. exactly, but I'm just,
What else has to be done, John?
So there's still some minor lighting that needs to be done. The backstage has to be repainted, so we put that as an add-on. The backstage is now going to be painted all black. Um, and also the ceiling, there's a little bit more, they did start work on the ceiling, but there's more repairs that need to be done for the ceiling.
And how much do we owe them?
It was 80 something thousand.
Yeah, it was about 88, 89,000, I think it was.
We could hire a local painter to finish painting it and pocket the 80.
Yes.
Well,
You want to paint, Rita?
some of that, Rita, some of that money was for work already done. So, yeah, it's not $88,000 left of work to do. But, you know, we would like to see them finish painting because we need to get moving on the curtains and the rigging. We're putting new rigging up.
Sure.
And we want to have the painting done first.
Mr. Walsh?
is there anybody that hasn't seen the auditorium?
I haven't seen it. God,
One
I do want
person.
I've only seen parts.
Right, okay. No, I'm just asking.
It is important to remember that while some people have seen it, without curtains, you haven't seen the auditorium yet. And
Wow.
when those that's why getting this work done is so important. Our curtains are ready, and we can't put curtains up until the painting is done on the stage and the ceiling.
And we refinished the stage flooring, so it's been stained and varnished, and it looks good. And right now, it's all covered up to protect it because they're still doing work. But, you know, we're getting close. I mean, very close to finishing this. It's just killing us. The devil is in the details. So we have to chase down the vendor to have him finish the job.
So just for clarification then, the item will go on the agenda once they bill us, or like when would it go on the agenda?
They already billed us. We pulled it the last agenda.
Okay, so,
Mr. Darian pulled it.
so we've been billed, but we are holding off on the payment until the work is
We get an
completed.
updated work schedule, because
Got
right
it.
now the order of operations is just getting screwed up because we're trying to coordinate our own school events with accommodating them for the space to do the work.
Got it, okay, thank you.
And from a board's perspective, we agreed to table it till tonight's meeting, and now we've talked about it, and we've agreed to table it indefinitely until our business administrator tells us we should pay it. So we're going to do nothing until we hear from them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, if I were to not pay someone, it would affect my credit. Does this in fact affect the credit for the school district? I just wanted a clarification.
No.
Okay.
Any other questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Abstain.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes?
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Delegate report, Mr. Walsh.
nothing to report.
Personnel, Mrs. Walker.
I'd like to present the A.
It's representing actually F1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question.
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mrs. Downing?
Abstain.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Policy, Mrs. Negum.
Nothing to report today.
I see our COVID task force is off our agenda. Did we take it off on purpose? Public Relations and I guess COVID Task Force, Mr. Griffin.
No update on the COVID task force right now. The public relations, there's a wonderful copy of the eye on OPS. The draft has been sourced to the committee. So I think I don't know the exact date of when it will go out, but there's some wonderful stories in it. I don't know if it's in everybody's packet or if it's just in our committee's packet.
Yeah, I did bring copies in case anybody else wanted to see a copy prior to it going out. It will go to the printer on Friday.
Ms. Moses, I have one, I think, typo that I can share with you later.
Can I get a copy of it next time with the committee? Any old or new business? No, open to the public. Any old or new business? Want to show us your new shirt?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks to Mrs. Walker for all her hard work.
This is a lightweight, sweat wicking, because,
On the 4th of July.
4th of July starts out, usually a little shady, but by the time we get halfway through, we're sweating buckets, so.
And you can shake it out.
And this is embroidered, very nice, and has the name in case you forget who you are. This way you don't have to introduce yourself later on too. It's nice. Everyone looks at you and so, but it's very nice.
Good job, Ms. Walker.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have to get one for her. Mrs. Downey. Okay, any other old or new business? Okay, we need to go into a closed session. Mr. Darian, would you like to make the motion for student issue?
I make a motion and we go into closed session to discuss a student issue.
We will not be coming out and taking any action.